If you are not inside your body, then where exactly are you right now? It seems like an absurd question, but it may be the most important one of your life. Because if your consciousness does not occupy space the way you imagine, then your entire identity needs to be reinterpreted. Over the next few minutes, you will confront an idea that may alter your perception of presence, time, and existence. We are going to explore an uncomfortable yet deeply liberating possibility. And if you stay until the end, you may realize that you were never where you thought you were. We have all felt that sensation of being in here, looking out at the world out there. We point to our chest when we speak about ourselves. We touch our heads when we mention our thoughts, as if there were a physical center where the self resides. This perception feels so natural that we never stop to examine it. But if this feeling is merely a learned interpretation, then perhaps we are confusing experience with explanation. And that confusion may be shaping our entire relationship with life and with death. There is a silent assumption that organizes almost all of human experience, the idea that you are located inside your body like an occupant inside a house. This image is intuitive, almost automatic. When you close your eyes, you feel that you remain here behind your face, inside your skull, observing thoughts and sensations as they arise. But this sense of location has never been deeply examined. Do you actually experience a physical point where consciousness is situated, or do you simply interpret experience that way? The difference is fundamental, because if consciousness cannot be found as an object within space, then perhaps it is not confined by space. But this is only the beginning. Observe your direct experience in this exact moment. The sensations of the body appear as perceptions, the weight of your hands, the rhythm of your breath, the temperature of the air. All of it arises as content within experience. You perceive the body in the same way you perceive a sound or an image. The body is something that is perceived, but that which perceives does not appear as a visible object. You can observe your thoughts, but you cannot observe the observer in the same way. This creates a radical inversion in the way we understand identity. Perhaps the body is inside consciousness and not the other way around. And now comes the part that almost no one considers. If the body is perceived within consciousness, then the feeling of being inside the body may be nothing more than an interpretation built up over a lifetime. From an early age, we learn to associate visual perception with physical position. We see through our eyes and conclude that we are behind them. Yet that conclusion is a logical inference, not a direct experience. The experience itself does not present clear physical boundaries. Consciousness has no visible anatomical contours. It presents itself as an open field within which everything appears. This suggests that location may be a narrative, not evidence. When you imagine a distant place, it arises within your experience without occupying any real physical space. When you recall an old memory, it appears within consciousness without displacing anything material. This indicates that the experiential space of the mind is not identical to measurable physical space. There are two types of space occurring simultaneously. One is external space, measured by instruments. The other is the inner space of experience, where images and thoughts arise. And perhaps we are conflating these two levels when we try to locate consciousness. If the sensation of location is illusory, then your identity is not confined to your skull or your chest. This does not mean that you are floating on some mystical plane. It simply means that the question "where am I" may itself be based on a conceptual misunderstanding. Perhaps consciousness is not something that occupies space. Perhaps it is that within which space is perceived, and this leads us to an even deeper level of investigation. Now let us deepen the investigation with greater precision. You perceive thoughts arising in the mind without conscious effort. You perceive emotions shifting in intensity throughout the day. You feel the body, hear surrounding sounds, see colors and shapes in space. All of this appears as content within experience. But can that which perceives these experiences be found as a specific physical object? Try to locate it honestly. As if you were searching for something concrete inside your head or your chest. You find images, you find sensations, you find memories, but you do not find the observer as a tangible thing. It is always present, yet it never appears as an object among other objects. This suggests that the observer does not belong to the same category as that which is observed. If the observer cannot be located as part of the body, then perhaps it is not confined to traditional physical coordinates. The brain can be examined by scans, the body can be measured and described, but the experience of being does not appear as a visible anatomical structure. Science identifies correlations between neural activity and conscious states, but correlation is not absolute identity. The fact that certain brain patterns accompany experience does not necessarily mean that experience is produced as a localized physical object. It may simply indicate that a functional relationship exists between body and consciousness. But this is only the beginning of the question we are exploring. Notice that even when you try to find the center of experience, all that arises is more experience. If you close your eyes and search for the self, you find only thoughts saying, I. If you try to locate consciousness behind your eyes, you find only a sense of pressure or mental images. At no point do you find a solid object called the observer. This does not mean it does not exist. It means its nature may not be objective. Perhaps it is the very act of perceiving rather than something that can be perceived as a separate thing. When you say, I am, that statement does not necessarily depend on memory of the past or expectation of the future. There is a basic sense of presence that precedes any description. This sense has no definite form, no size, no measurable location. It is simply experience happening. This presence seems closer to a field than to an object. And if that is true, then perhaps you are not inside the body, but the body is appearing within the conscious presence that you are. If the observer cannot be found as a bounded physical entity, then the question of where you are begins to lose its traditional meaning. Perhaps consciousness is not located like an object in space, but is that which makes any location possible. This possibility is not a final conclusion, but it opens the way toward an even more radical understanding of human identity. And it is precisely that radicalness that leads us to the next level of this investigation. If the observer cannot be located as a physical object, then perhaps its nature is not material, but perspectival. Consider this carefully and calmly. Everything you experience appears from a point of view. Sounds reach you, images present themselves before you, thoughts arise within you. There is always an implicit perspective from which the world is organized. Yet this perspective has no form of its own. It cannot be seen as a thing. It cannot be touched. It cannot be measured. It is like an invisible center from which all experience unfolds. Perhaps you are not an object within the world, but the point of view from which the world is perceived. When you look out at the horizon, it seems as though you are facing something external and distant. But that entire landscape appears within your conscious experience. The sensation of depth, distance, and form is constructed by perception. The world is not experienced outside of consciousness, but within it, as phenomenon. This does not mean denying the existence of an objective reality. It simply means recognizing that your relationship with that reality is mediated by conscious experience. If everything you know of the world appears within perception, then perhaps perception is not inside the world in the way we imagine, but there is something even deeper in this inversion. If you are the point of perspective, then your identity cannot be reduced to the physical body that appears within that perspective. The body may be part of the scenery of experience, but it is not necessarily the center of it, just as a camera records images without being the image. The body may register stimuli without being the core of experience. This distinction is subtle, but powerful, because if the body is an instrument of perception, then consciousness may be something that operates through it, rather than something contained by it. And this possibility radically changes the question of where you are. Notice how conscious experience seems to expand and contract as your attention moves. When you contemplate the night sky, your perception feels vast and open. When you focus on a specific task, it feels narrow and concentrated. This suggests that consciousness is not a rigid container, but a dynamic field of attention. It does not appear to be limited by fixed anatomical walls. It feels more like open space within which phenomena arise and disappear. And this quality challenges the traditional idea that you exist inside a biological compartment. If consciousness is fundamental perspective, then perhaps the right question is not where am I physically, but what is the nature of the perspective that I am? This shift in focus completely transforms the investigation. You stop searching for a specific place and begin to investigate the quality of the presence that perceives. And this investigation leads us to the most daring level of this reflection. If consciousness functions as perspective rather than as a localized object, then we need to consider a hypothesis that challenges our intuition. Perhaps you are not inside physical space in the way you believe. Perhaps physical space is a dimension that appears within conscious experience. This may sound extreme, but observe your own experience. Everything you know of space is perceived. You have never experienced space outside of consciousness. Space arises as an organized structure of experience. This does not mean the physical world is an illusion, but it suggests that your experience of the world is inseparable from the consciousness that perceives it. The space you experience is always mediated by the senses and interpreted by the brain. What you call the external world is an organized representation built from sensory stimuli: perception, constructs, depth, distance, and form based on electrical signals. This means that spatial experience is dependent on consciousness. Without perception, there is no experience of distance or location. Therefore, perhaps consciousness is not inside space, but space is inside consciousness as structured experience. But this is only the beginning of the implications of this hypothesis. If space is perceived within consciousness, then you may not be a small object lost inside an immense universe. Perhaps you are the field within which the universe appears as experience. This does not imply that you control the universe, but it indicates that your relationship with it is more intimate than we imagine. Everything you know of the cosmos appears within perception. There has never been experience outside of it. This suggests that consciousness may be a fundamental condition for any experience of reality. If this hypothesis is true, even partially, then your identity is not confined to the physical structure we call the body. The body may be a specific point of interaction within a larger field of consciousness. You may be more like a field of perception than a solid object. This profoundly alters the way we understand separation, distance, and location. And it begins to dissolve the idea of absolute confinement. If you are not limited by physical space in the way you thought, then questions about death, distance, and separation take on new meaning. That which does not occupy space as an object may not be able to be destroyed as an object. This reflection does not close the mystery, but opens a new dimension of investigation, and it is precisely there that the existential implication begins to reveal itself with full force. If you are not inside the body in the way you have always believed, then something profound begins to shift within you. Much of human fear is born from the sensation of physical confinement. We believe we are temporarily organized matter, trapped inside a vulnerable organism that will inevitably deteriorate. This perception fuels anxiety, attachment, and the need for control. But if consciousness is not located like a physical object, then the narrative changes. You may not be something trapped inside a body, but something that uses the body as an instrument of experience. This possibility alters the way you face aging, fragility, and even death itself. And this shift is not merely intellectual. It is existential. When you begin to suspect that your identity is not purely biological, the fear of absolute extinction loses some of its force. This does not eliminate the pain of loss or the emotional weight of separation, but it transforms the interpretation of what is happening. If you are conscious perspective, then experiences come and go within you. The body changes, thoughts change, circumstances change, but the presence that perceives it all remains. This silent presence was there in childhood, in youth, in maturity. It has moved through different phases of the body without losing the basic quality of being. Recognizing this can generate an inner stability that does not depend so heavily on external conditions. This understanding also reshapes your relationship with attachment. If you believe you are only localized matter, you tend to cling intensely to whatever you consider part of yourself. But if you begin to perceive that you are a field of experience, then objects, roles, and narratives cease to be the foundation of identity. They become temporary expressions within something larger. This does not lead to indifference, but to maturity. You continue to live, to love, to build, but with the awareness that your essence is not confined to these passing forms, and that changes the quality of your presence in the world. The perception that you may exist beyond physical space also transforms your relationship with purpose. If life is not merely biological survival, then perhaps purpose is not simply about preserving the body at any cost. Perhaps it is about deepening consciousness's awareness of itself. Perhaps it is about maturing perception, expanding understanding, refining sensitivity. The body may be a precious instrument for this journey, but not its final boundary. This perspective brings responsibility, not escapism, because if you are consciousness in the process of discovery, then every experience matters. If this hypothesis holds even a measure of truth, then death does not simply represent annihilation, but a transition of perspective. This is not a dogmatic assertion, it is an open inquiry. You do not need to believe blindly, only observe honestly. If you were never confined to the body in the way you imagined, then perhaps you were never as limited as you feared. And that possibility, in and of itself, is already profoundly transformative. If you are not inside the body as you have always believed, then the question is no longer merely geographical. It is no longer about physical location, but about the nature of identity. Perhaps you have never been an object occupying space, but the very condition that allows space to be perceived. This idea is not a definitive conclusion. It is an invitation to ongoing investigation. Because the more you observe your own experience, the more you realize that the observer cannot be found as a material thing. If this reflection stirred something in you, share in the comments which part most challenged your perception. Your experience may deepen the understanding of others who are on this same journey of inquiry. Like this video, if this reflection expanded your vision of identity and consciousness, and subscribe to keep exploring ever deeper layers of reality. Because if you are not inside the body, then we need to investigate something even more radical. If consciousness does not occupy space as we imagined, then what exactly is reality? And if reality is not merely organized matter, then what are you really